friends, and welcome to Bad Book Club, where I, Jade, a silly goose with an English degree, read classic and popular literature so you don't have to. Hello friends, and welcome back to Bad Book Club, and also to our spooky month of October, where I'm going to be doing lots of spooky books and silly books and anything and vaguely sort of spooky sounding, along with this week's book, which is The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which I've never read before and was a super fast read. I read it in like one day, and it was super adorable and actually really surprising. And it was written by Mark Haddon, and the premise of the story is about Christopher Boone, who's a 15-year-old with Asperger's, and he relates well to animals but doesn't really understand humans. Like, he's just kind of a quirky dude, and it's his quest to find out who killed his neighbor's dog, Wellington. So it's an adorable story. And I chose it because it's a coming-of-age story, like our theme for this season of the pod. And also because, I don't know, it's vaguely spooky. There's a mystery. We don't know what's going on. It's like, what happened to Wellington? I want to know. And here's the other thing. I don't actually like actually scary things. So I only have 2 books this month that are slightly scary. I have Carmilla, which will be later in October, and I also have It by Stephen King. That one is kind of spooky, but is the only one I'm reading that's like really spooky. I don't really like actually scary things because I'm a wimp, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, Mark Haddon is just a good writer who's written a ton. He's from like England, I believe, and there's nothing much. I did some research on him, and he's just a cool dude, just an author guy. He won some awards for The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime and stuff like that. Yeah, it's a good book, and so I don't have much to say about him. I just thought we'd jump into the story. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's go. 7 minutes after midnight, Christopher Boone finds his neighbor's poodle, Wellington, murdered in her front yard. The dog has been stabbed with a garden fork, affixing him to the ground. Christopher tells us that Mrs. Shears is a family friend and that he liked Wellington. He also tells us that he knows all the capital cities in the world, and he says that Siobhan, I'm going to say Siobhan, it's spelled really interesting, and him have worked on understanding facial expressions because he has some trouble understanding what people mean sometimes. This, along with some drawings of the faces that she's working with him, the voice of the text, and the chapter numbers, which are only prime numbers, the reader can assume that Christopher has some sort of ASD, and while the author has said it's Asperger's, it's actually never explicitly said in the novel. He kneels down, takes the fork out of Wellington, and gives the dog a hug. And then Mrs. Shears comes out at the exact wrong moment, screaming at him, telling him to get the quote-unquote fuck away from her dog because it's dead and she's freaking out. She doesn't know what's going on. And while she's screaming, he backs away exactly 2 meters, covers his ears, and puts his head to the ground. He jumps around a lot in the chapters, explaining his life and situation, and also the story of Wellington and the murder mystery. And he says this is a murder mystery novel because Siobhan said he should write something he would like to read himself. And that he started with the dog because it is exciting, and that he likes dogs sometimes better than people. And dogs can still be murder victims, like in The Hound of Baskervilles. Back to Wellington, the police arrive. Chris likes the police. By the way, I call him Chris just for like shortness sake of this podcast, but he talks to himself and to other people as Christopher, so keep that in mind. He likes the police and tells them that he didn't kill the dog, but found it. Chris starts to feel overwhelmed by the cop's questions and begins to groan because it's white noise to him. And the cop reaches down to touch him, and honestly, he's being really uncool for someone who's obviously not like a normal human. I think if someone did this in front of me, my first reaction would not be to like call them a little shit and then like grab their arm, but that's what he does. And Chris panics and hits him because he doesn't like being touched, which honestly, fair. The cop curses at him, arrests him, and oddly this makes Christopher calmer because that's what they say in the movies is what he says, like, you're being arrested. He was like, oh, I'm calmer now. And in the squad car, he stares at the sky and describes a lot of science-y things about the Milky Way universe, mostly in terms of how it is a disk, so stars often look more full in a certain direction. And he talks about the universe in general and how he likes to think about it. He's obviously incredibly smart, and honestly, there are some things in here that only make sense with pictures, and he includes them, which makes this a really interesting and pretty fast read. However, it also means he's much smarter than I am, so I'm not going to try to explain all of those bits. And at this point, he also explains to us that all his chapters are prime numbers, because he likes prime numbers a lot, and it's a very cute chapter with like a graph about how he figures out prime numbers and how he's able to count to them, and it's very impressive. At the station, he empties his pockets, and there's a little list of everything that was in them, including a puzzle, Swiss Army knife, food for his pet rat, which pet rats rule, guys. I have rats too, and more. They let him keep his watch because he says he needs to know the exact time, and screamed when they tried to take it off of him. He waits in a police cell, noting that it's 2 meters by 2 meters and that he likes its size and finds it nice inside of there. And he wonders if Mrs. Shears will be arrested for lying because, well, lying is bad and he did not kill Wellington, which is like a really cute. I think the voice in his head's a little younger than he is because he's supposed to be 15. But since he thinks that way, like it's so simple in his mind, it comes across childlike, even though it's kind of not. But anyway. Chris says he has trouble with people because of unspoken communication like body language, and also because people often speak in metaphors and they don't make any sense to him. In fact, he thinks of metaphors as lies because they're not true. He says that when someone says you're the apple of my eye, he imagines an apple in someone's eye and it confuses him, and he doesn't understand how that's related to love. And he talks about how the word metaphor itself in the Latin context means carrying from one place to another, and when he describes something by using a word for something that it isn't. And he says that the word metaphor is in fact a metaphor itself. This book is full of like fun facts, I feel. If you want an airplane read or just a read because you are sitting outside and it's gorgeous or you have a weekend, this book is perfect. It has adorable fun facts, it has little pictures, it's not a hard read, and it's really interesting. But anyway, his dad arrives at the police station to get him, completely angry that they locked him up, just yelling. He can hear his father yelling. And eventually, he comes to his cell and he's like, Christopher, and they put their fingertips together instead of a hug because he doesn't like being to be touched. And that is such a great detail. And a cop questions him about hitting the cop. He says that Christopher meant to hit him, but not to hurt him, because they say, did you mean to hit him, Christopher? Implying, did you purposefully hit him like in a negative way? And Christopher says, well, I meant to hit him because I wanted him to stop touching me, but no, I didn't mean to hurt him. And he like cannot say that, of course, he didn't mean to hit him. It's that quiet like understanding underneath the word of what the intentions mean. He doesn't get that. It's all on surface. So his dad is obviously a teeny bit like exasperated by this, and so is the cop, but I think they both understand what Chris is saying, which is I hit him because he was touching me and I wanted him to stop, but it was not like a purposeful punch to give to a cop just cause. And Chris says that he always tells the truth and that he did not kill the dog. And the police officer gives him a caution, which I guess is similar to like a warning, but on file, but like the British way. They are in like Britain, London, I'm assuming. He gives us a town, but honestly, I'm not paying that much attention to it. They're in a different country, so. Chris says not only does he always tell the truth, but he cannot lie. He said his mom, this is the first time he's mentioned her, thought it was because he's a good person, but it's just that he can't, because like he says that if he thinks of all the things that didn't happen, he starts to get overloaded in his brain. So if he says, if I lie that dad wasn't here, then he could also be wearing a scuba suit and also be robbing a bank. And then all of the like options in his brain start to like get really big. And so he cannot tell a lie. And that's what he explains. And honestly, this book has the most eye-opening description of ASD that I've ever read. I am not sure exactly how accurate it is because I don't think Mark Haddon has it himself, but it feels really accurate, and it's really interesting and fun to read from his point of view because he's a really likable person and he's actually a little funny, and it's not like you're laughing at him. It's like you're laughing because he's such a simple person and he thinks that people are like stupid. It's really funny. And it's fun to read from Chris's point of view because he sees the world in like his own terms rather than everyone else's. And I think a heartbreaking thing about this book is that he knows he's different, but he doesn't know how to fix that or why. He just is who he is, and he likes himself, which is really nice. And he also says that for that reason, everything written in the book is true. And that is a really interesting statement to me because it also means that this first person point of view, which is usually an unreliable narrator, is not actually unreliable in the way that I'm used to because he can't tell lies. Instead, it's unreliable because we only get his point of view, and his point of view is different from a normal person's. So instead of seeing the story how we would see it, he gives us the story how he would see it. And so we don't get all of the information. When he's talking to a person, we only get the words they say or what they're wearing, rather than what they might be trying to get across. And it's almost like trying to read between the lines of what's happening. And I thought it was really interesting. Anyway, back to the story. His dad seems honestly like a really good dad, but on the car ride home, Chris is looking up at the stars, and his father says, "Please keep your nose out of other people's business." And Chris says that he understands, but he still wants to know who killed the dog. And he just needs to know who did it. And he gets home, he feeds his rat, Toby, and he plays games all night, and he comes downstairs at like 2 a.m., and his dad is crying. And Christopher asks him if he's sad about the dog, and his father says, "You could very well say that," which to me implies that he's sad about Christopher or something unrelated or something slightly related to the dog. Because this is what I was talking about, where you have to read between the lines, because Christopher takes that and goes, "Okay," and then goes upstairs. But to us, that could mean several things. So anyway, he mentions that his mom died 2 years ago. His mom just didn't come home one day. His dad made some calls, and then he told Christopher that his mom won't be around for a while because she's in the hospital because of something wrong with her heart, which is really odd, because why wouldn't you know that your wife's in the hospital? And also, he's just acting strange. And then he says that Christopher can't visit her for some reason, which is also weird, because if she was in the hospital, why wouldn't you visit her? But I don't know, maybe he just didn't want Chris there. And Chris makes a get well card for her, which is very sweet, and he takes that as, gospel. He's like, sure. Chris tells us that he defines a good day, a very good day, and black days based on how many red and yellow cars he sees on the way to school on the bus. So a bunch of red cars are good days, and if he sees like 4 yellow cars in a row, it's a black day, which means he just sits in the corner all day. He defines how good his day is going to be based on that choice, because he mentions he hates yellow and brown. And he describes a talk that he had with the school psychiatrist, Mr. Jevons, about how he likes things to be logical and how he would like to be an astronaut despite the fact he knows it's unlikely. He has a really interesting view of the world in that he thinks of it in black and white, but he also understands that the world is not that way, and that's what he likes about it. It's very adorable. And on a good day, he decides to find out who killed Wellington. And Siobhan says that since they're writing stories in class, he should write about this story. That means that this is first person past. So it is written like he's talking to you. And that's why he jumps around so much from chapter to chapter. And the chapters are really fast. So I feel like I'm making a ton of progress while reading. He mentions that his mom died 2 weeks later, which is a big bummer. He said his get well card was 9 red cars on the front for a super, super good day. And that's really, really cute. And his dad tells him that he's really, really sorry. And Christopher's like, it wasn't his fault. He doesn't seem really affected by the news, but it's one of those things where he's so logical that he finds it ridiculous to be sad about someone who's dead. Because why would you be sad about someone who's dead? And then he says that night, Mrs. Shears came over, the woman who owns Wellington, and made them dinner that night. Christopher says he wants to find out who killed Wellington because he doesn't do what he's always told, often because people don't make sense. Often he's confused by what they ask him to do. So he tells us that keep off the grass signs confuse him because it should say keep off the grass in this section or keep off the grass unless you're walking this way. He needs details. And he says that his teacher, Siobhan, is good at telling him what to do because she'll say, Christopher, sit in this chair, don't touch the crayons, don't touch the XYZ, and make sure to do XYZ. And she's very specific. And he says he goes to Mrs. Shears that day and says that he didn't kill her dog and that he's going to find out who did kill her dog. And she is honestly also kind of rude to him. Why is everyone so rude to Christopher? I feel like it's really mean. But anyway, she's like, I don't want to see you right now. Like, you need to leave. And he's like, he says, do you know who killed him? And she leaves and closes the door on him. And he decides to do investigative work. And he goes into her backyard and looks at her shed and realizes it was her own garden fork that killed Wellington. But he dismisses her as a suspect because of her reaction that night when he was hugging the dog. And she sees him in the backyard and comes out and tells him that she'll call the cops if he doesn't leave. And that night he feeds his rat Toby, happy that he's a detective. Chris tells us he doesn't believe in God or heaven because he doesn't understand where they would be. He asked a reverend this once and he said, oh, he's on like another universe, a different plane. And he has this whole conversation about black holes. And he mentions that people just die and become part of flowers and grass and trees. And that's enough for him. And he mentions his mom was cremated and he didn't go to her funeral, which is odd. I guess his dad didn't take him. And he says he likes to think that she is everywhere, in the air and water and in the garden, just around him. And that day, he plans to ask his neighbors and interview more of them, despite stranger danger, because he wants to know what happened to Wellington. So he draws a map of his street, which is very adorable. It's in the book. And he says he'll avoid his drug-taking neighbors, which are right next door. And he says that he normally avoids strangers, but he's not scared because he can hit people very hard if he's touched, like Sarah, who he once knocked unconscious and gave a concussion because she touched him. And I really like that in this story, he doesn't actually explain a lot of people because you wouldn't if you were him. Like if I was writing in my diary, I would not explain to my diary who Sarah is because I would not need to. So I like that he says he hit Sarah, who I'm assuming is a classmate, but he doesn't tell us who she is, which makes a lot of sense. First, he visits Mr. Thompson in 40, that's the address, and he lives across from Mrs. Shears. He's kind of like a beer drinker and he's kind of gruff, and he says that he was out of town, didn't see anything. He knocks on house 42 and they're not home. House 44 is a black woman who says, "You're Christopher, aren't you?" and tells him that she saw nothing suspicious, but if his father said not to put his nose in other people's business, that he should listen to him. House 43 is Mr. Wise, and he says policemen are getting younger when he opens the door and laughs, and Christopher doesn't like people laughing at him, so he just turns around and leaves, which is so sad. Why do people laugh at him? It's just so mean. House 39 is Mrs. Alexander, who's in her garden, and she is the nicest one of everyone she talks to. She asks him how old he is, and he tells her his year, month, and day age. He says he's 15, 3 months, and X number of days. And he tells her about his pet Toby, his rat, and she offers to bring out tea and some cake, but once she describes the cake for him, and he says it's yellow, he doesn't want it, she says, well, I'll bring out cookies instead, and she goes in to get the stuff, but he's waiting there for too long, and he thinks that she might call the cops, and he says that he doesn't want to get in trouble with the cops again, so he just leaves. Which is, I feel kind of sad to read because I feel like it'll hurt her feelings. If she was so understanding, I'm sure it's fine. And on the way home, he thinks of possible motives as to why you would kill a dog. He says you could be mad at the dog. You could be, in general, mad. I'm assuming he means crazy. Or you would want to make Mrs. Shears upset. He decides it was probably a stranger since he doesn't know anyone who's mad at Wellington, crazy in general, or wants to make Mrs. Shears upset. And he says most murderers know the victim. That's just a fact. And only Mr. Shears doesn't like Mrs. Shears and knows Wellington. So he decides Mr. Shears is his prime suspect. He tells us that Mr. Shears left Mrs. Shears 2 years ago, and that Mrs. Shears after that would often spend the night at their place, and that he liked it because she helped them clean up, even if she used a lot of metaphors that confused him. He tells us that everyone else at his school is stupid because he doesn't understand the phrase learning disability since everyone has one. It's this adorable chapter where he says that, like, if you have a hearing aid, that's a disability, and learning French is like hard and that's a disability. So it's ridiculous to say that it's a learning disability. But I understand what he means, and I think we all understand. Like I said, he doesn't get the undercurrent, the connotation for certain words. He gets the definition, not the connotation. For anyone who's unsure, the definition of a word is what the word means, and the connotation is the feeling associated with the word that we all know. So I could say that I'm frugal, which would, like, kind of the connotation of that would mean that I'm good at budgeting and in general not spending a lot of money. Or I could say that I'm cheap, which implies that I am the connotation's a little bit more negative. So that's the example, just in case you did not know. And anyway, he says that while everyone else at his school is stupid, he is very smart, which I believe at this point, and that he's going to take his A-level maths because his dad argued with the principal until she relented and let him take it. Now, I'm not British and I don't know what A-level maths are. I'm sure it's a big deal. I'm assuming it's like his senior test or something for someone above his grade. But yeah, I'm just assuming that because I don't know what that means, and he talks about it a lot in the book. But anyway, he says that after he takes his A-level maths and passes it, because he's going to, that he'll go to a good university and major in maths or physics, and then he'll get a good job and make money and get married so he won't be lonely, which is very sweet. Next, he says his mom and dad used to argue often because he has behavioral problems. He says he has a lot, and then he lists them. He says, 1, not talking to people for a long time, not eating or drinking anything for a long time, not liking being touched, screaming when I'm angry or confused, not like being in really small places with other people, smashing things when I'm angry or confused, groaning, not liking yellow things or brown things or refusing to touch yellow things or brown things, refusing to use my toothbrush if anyone else has touched it, not eating food if different sorts of food are touching each other, not noticing that people are angry with me, not smiling, saying things that other people think are rude. And he has footnotes on these that say, once I didn't talk to anyone for 5 weeks. When I was 6, Mother used to get me to drink strawberry-flavored slimming meals out of a measuring jug, and we would have competitions to see how fast I could drink a quarter of a liter. People say that you always have to tell the truth, but they do not mean this because you are not allowed to tell old people that they are old. You are not allowed to tell people if they smell funny or if a grown-up has made a fart. You are not allowed to say, I don't like you, unless that person has been horrible to you. He also says he has problems doing stupid things, hitting other people, hating France, driving Mother's car, and getting cross when someone has moved the furniture. And he has even more footnotes with examples of when those things have happened. So I really like his penchant for lists. I feel like it makes for a really satisfying reading experience because it's just nice to read a list, especially lists that give you lots of information. So I was a fan of that. That night, his dad has food ready for him for dinner, and he asks Chris where he's been. Chris says he's been out, which he tells us is a white lie because it's technically the truth, but he doesn't tell all the truth because he doesn't want to get in trouble because he knows he's not supposed to be putting his nose in other people's business. And then his dad says that Mrs. Shears called and tells him that you can't do that. Stop talking to people. And Chris says, well, I think Mr. Shears is my prime suspect. And his dad gets very angry, calling the man evil. He says that name is not to be said in their house. And he says that Mrs. Shears is not their friend anymore. And he lists the things that Chris is not allowed to do. You are not to go asking Mrs. Shears about who killed that bloody dog. You are not to go asking anyone about who killed that bloody dog. You are not to go trespassing in other people's gardens. You are to stop this ridiculous bloody detective game right now. I'm going to make you promise, Christopher, and you know what it means when I make you promise. I think at this point, I'm starting to like the dad a little less just because he's kind of being very angry and mean to Chris, and he just wants to find out who killed this dog. I get there's stuff he doesn't know, but it's just not the nice way to treat him. He got arrested over this dog. Maybe calm down. And Christopher thinks he would like to be an astronaut because he likes small spaces, he likes alone time, he likes stars and machines, and he could bring his pet rat Toby. Like I said, the chapters switch around a lot, so I'm just going to be switching from topic to topic, but we're going in order. Sioban says his story is good as it is, and Chris is upset because it won't be finished, and he doesn't like that the murderer is still at large. And then he says that he had 2 black days in a row, and on the 3rd day, he closed his eyes on the bus because he says after 2 black days, he's allowed to do that. 5 days later, however, 5 red cars made it a super good day, and he decided to investigate again because he knew something good would happen. After school, he saw Mrs. Alexander again, and they have a really nice conversation about what he likes. He pets her dog, and Chris tries to investigate without breaking the rules his father has set for him. He says that he tells us that Mrs. Alexander doesn't want to discuss Mr. Shears, and Chris asks if Mr. Shears killed his mom, and she is shocked that his mom died. She says that because she doesn't want Chris to get in trouble, she'll explain. And she says that Mr. Shears and his mom had an affair before she died. And she says, please don't tell your dad I told you that. I'm only telling you because I know that you are not supposed to be investigating. And if you ask him, he'll know you're investigating. So I'm just trying to help. She seems like a nice girl who's just trying to help. And she says, come by and talk to me anytime if you need to. He then tells us about math and why he likes math so much. He says that Mr. Jevons asked him if he likes math because it makes sense. And then he tells us about the Monty Hall problem, which I've heard of before. Basically, it was this problem where if you have 3 doors and behind 2 of the doors are goats and behind one a car, and a talk show host opens one door and you see a goat, that some sort of probability means that you should switch from the door that you originally picked because it's a higher probability you'll get the car. He explains it with a drawing, and he shows us all these messages that math PhDs messaged in saying how wrong this PhD woman was who got this answer right. And he tells us that math and numbers are not straightforward at all, and that's why he likes them. He likes trying to figure them out. And then that night, his father is sitting at home with his friend, Rodri, who treats Christopher like a calculator. He's like, what's like 200 times blah, blah, blah. And like he answers the question and he laughs at him. And it's really rude. I can't believe his dad didn't step in and stop that because that's not cool. And he mentions that he doesn't eat yellow food like we know, but because of that, he carries around red food coloring, which is actually really smart. And this whole time, you guys, I just want to say yellow is my favorite color. I was like, why do you hate yellow? I love yellow. But anyway, he decides to go out into the backyard and lay down in the garden and stare at the stars for a bit. And he describes the garden in detail to us and tells us he likes to describe things. And then he goes inside to feed Toby. The next chapter is about The Hound of Baskervilles, which is his favorite book. He explains that it's a mystery, and he lists the clues and the red herrings throughout the whole novel. He explains that he likes Sherlock Holmes, and he says some fun facts about him, which are that, in fact, in the books he never says, "Elementary, my dear Watson." And then also, what's the other one? He's never described as wearing that hat. It was just on the cover. So, yeah, some fun facts. I told you this book is just full of fun facts. So if you want a fun facts book, this is it. I found it for you. Anyway, the next day, Siobhan reads his book and reads his conversation with Mrs. Alexander and asks Chris if he's okay. He says it would be silly to be sad about something whenever that person is dead already. So he's completely fine. He says he's obviously telling the truth. And he tells us that later in class that day, he painted a picture of an alien. He gives us the picture, which is very sweet. And he says that his memory is like film, and he remembers everything that happens to him, and he can rewind and fast forward through that film at any time. He remembers some memories with his mom, like her swimming and him screaming because he thought she was bitten by a shark until she calmed him down, or her telling him she wished that she was living in the country in a farmhouse. He says that he has trouble imagining things that don't exist, like a happy place or anything like that. And he mentions that his grandma's film in her brain is all mixed up, and that's why she has trouble. So she must have some sort of dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that. He says that day he walked home. Well, he didn't walk home, but he got home, walked to the kitchen, put his book on the kitchen table, and then went back and watched Blue Planet. That day, Dad comes home and he goes into the kitchen, and he tells us at 5:54 p.m. that his dad came in extremely angry. He asked Chris if he's stupid, and I'm going to say the conversation for you because I don't even know if I can convey it, so let me do it. Holy fucking Jesus, Christopher, how stupid are you? This is what Siobhan says is called a rhetorical question. It has a question mark at the end, but you are not meant to answer it because the person who is asking it already knows the answer. It is difficult to spot a rhetorical question. Then Father said, "What the fuck did I tell you, Christopher?" This was much louder. And I replied, not to mention Mr. Shears' name in our house, not to go asking Mrs. Shears or anyone about who killed that bloody dog, and not to go trespassing in other people's gardens, and to stop this ridiculous bloody detective game. Except I haven't done any out of those things. I just asked Mrs. Alexander about Mr. Shears because... But Father interrupted me and said, "Don't give me that bollocks, you little shit. You knew exactly what you were bloody doing. I've read the book, remember?" And when he said this, he held the book up and shook it. "What else did I say, Christopher?" I thought this might be another rhetorical question, but I wasn't sure. I found it hard to work out what to say because I was starting to get scared and confused. Then Father repeated the question. "What else did I say, Christopher?" "I don't know." "Come on, you're the fucking memory man." But I couldn't think. And Father said not to go around sticking your fucking nose into other people's business. And what do? You go around sticking your nose into other people's business. It is a really sad moment. I really, really don't like the way he's talking to Christopher because he doesn't know anything or why this is such a big deal. And if he were to tell him, then I'm sure he might be fine with it. But the problem is that he's curious and he wants to know the answers. You can't just tell someone who wants to know the answers that they should let it go because all that does is make them more curious. Like, I don't know. Sometimes I think people forget what it's like to be a kid because it's not even that he's on the spectrum or he has ASD or Asperger's. It's just that he thinks with a mind similar to a child in that if there's a question, he wants an answer. And I feel like all of us can relate to that. And I don't know, I just think it's really uncool that his dad yelled at him like that. But anyway, he keeps yelling, and it gets worse because his dad gets really mad and grabs him by the arm, which he's never done before. And Chris tells us his mom used to hit him occasionally because she had a temper. And Christopher says he starts to hit his dad to get him off him and hits him really hard twice. And then he has a little gap in his memory. And when he comes back to himself, he says his head is hurting, he's on the floor, his hand is bloody, and his dad is standing over him. And then his dad goes to the backyard with his book, throws it in the trash can, locks the door, and gets a drink. And I have written in the margins, oh my God, I thought his dad was cool at first, but definitely not at all ew. Because that is so uncool. We go from that to reasons why he hates yellow and brown, and he lists all the reasons, and he says, some people think it's silly that I hate these colors, but in life you make choices. It's the same as if in a menu you don't like avocados, and that's a really cute chapter, even if it's just after this crazy one. He says his dad apologized to him the next day and treated the scratch on his cheek so that it wouldn't get infected, and that to apologize, he took him to the zoo and made them lunch. And Christopher lists the animals he likes the most to us, like orangutans. It's really cute. And Christopher's dad tells him that he loves him and that he gets upset because he worries and he's sorry. And he asks if Christopher understands, and Christopher says, yeah, I understand. Loving as someone is being there for them and X, Y, and Z. So yes, I understand. And Christopher draws the zoo map from memory for fun, which I feel like is a really good example of how smart he is. And then they go home to avoid traffic or whatever. And he tells us that he doesn't like the author of Sherlock, despite the fact that he likes Sherlock Holmes, because the author believed in fairies, which aren't real. And he uses Latin to explain this phenomenon. Entia non sunt multiplicanda praeter necessitatem, which is Latin, and it means no more things should be presumed to exist than are absolutely necessary, which means that a murder victim is usually killed by someone known to them, and fairies are made out of paper, and you can't talk to someone who is dead. I really like that ending bit of the chapter because I feel like I don't want to ruin anything for you. But anyway, I feel like there's actually two mysteries in Christopher's life. And the obvious one is the one he's aware of. But there's another one that is present throughout this entire book that he doesn't even realize. And we don't even realize really until a bit further in. And that is the actual mystery. That's the actual reason for everything that's been happening in his life. And so I'm not going to ruin it, but we're going to keep going. The next day, Sayaban asks Chris why he has a bruise on his face. She asks him several questions about what happened, whether he hit Christopher, before asking if he is scared to go home, to which Chris replies he's not, and she lets it go. I honestly think it's entirely deplorable of his dad to hit him at all, and a little odd that his teacher didn't do more, but maybe it was because the teacher didn't want to disrupt his life or cause a change for him. She's been really cool so far, so I'm going to give her a benefit of the doubt, but girl, what you doing? Anyway, Chris gets home, and he decides he wants his book back because he was having a good time writing it, and because his investigation into Wellington is in it, and he still wants to know the answer. He checks the backyard trash where his dad went, but it isn't there. Obviously, his dad is smarter than I gave him credit for and faked out Chris that night by pretending to throw it out. Chris searches the house room by room, starting with the kitchen. He knows the exact measurements of the books and where it would fit, and looks in those places. He checks everywhere, but realizes his father must have left it in his room, and remembers he's been told not to mess with anything in there, so he will look around his father's room without messing with anything. In the bottom of a cupboard, he finds a plastic box filled with tools, but below that box is another box, and in that box, I feel like a silly Russian doll cartoon right now, but basically, in that box was his book. And then he says he didn't know what to do, because if he took it, his father would know, but he wants the book. At this moment, he hears his dad's van and decides to leave it, but as he's putting it away, he sees a letter addressed to him. Actually, there are several letters there, all unopened, all addressed to him. The handwriting, he says, could belong to Sayoban, his old teacher, Mr. Loxley, or his mother. His dad comes in and calls for him, and he takes the envelope and puts the box away. He puts the envelope under his mattress in his room and then goes downstairs to say hi to his dad. After dinner, his dad is randomly nice again. After dinner with his dad, he goes upstairs to read the letter, which I'll read to you. Dear Christopher, I'm sorry it's been such a very long time since I wrote my last letter to you. I've been very busy. I've got a new job working as a secretary for a factory that makes things out of steel. You'd like it a lot. The factory is full of huge machines that make the steel and cut it and bend it into whatever shapes they need. This week they're making a roof for a cafe in a shopping center in Birmingham. It's shaped like a huge flower, and they're going to stretch canvas over it to make it look like an enormous tent. She goes on for a long time, but basically at the end says, I'm sorry, Christopher, but I still love you. I hope you don't stay angry with me forever, and I'd love it if you were able to write me a letter, but remember to send it to the new address. I think about you all the time. Lots of love, your mom, XXXX. And in the margins I wrote, Dad just gets worse, which I think you could understand why, but basically, a bit ago, do you remember I was telling you that there's actually another mystery in Chris's life? And it's this. What happened to his mom and between his parents? And honestly, the trust he has in his dad must be really strong, because at this moment, he still doesn't realize that his mom is alive and that his dad has been lying. It explains a lot about her weird death, but also just causes me to ask more questions. And Chris himself, like I said, doesn't even think his dad is lying. He thinks this is like to a different Chris from a different mom, and doesn't know when it was written, says it could be before she died. And he's like excited there's another mystery. Like, he trusts his dad so much. He's like, there's got to be an explanation for this, even though there's definitely not one, and his dad is just awful. And as a reader, you know that. And I feel like it's heartbreaking to watch Chris not realize that really fast. Oh my gosh. But anyway, Chris tells us that lots of things are mysteries, but that doesn't mean there aren't answers, just that we haven't found the answer yet. He tells us an example about the population of frogs at a nearby lake to his school, which is really nice. Like, he just talks about the frogs and their population and how it's really difficult to predict what their population numbers will be because it's so confusing. 6 days later, Chris goes to look for more letters. He explains that on the first day, someone in his class, pooed all over the bathroom, and he started to eat it. And then Chris wet his pants because he refused to use it even after it had been cleaned, which, fair. Obviously, he goes to some school made for people with exceptionalities, and I think it's nice he has a school like that. But the story at this moment is really vivid. I think the point must be to get across that there are lots of people who are different from us in lots of different ways, not just Chris's way. He says that after a couple days, he is able to finally get to the letters, and that in the box, there were 43. He reads around 4 letters, and we realize that his mother left because she and his father were arguing so much, and she felt that he understood Chris better than she did. And she describes several events, one of which where they were in a shopping center, and he was having a hard time and broke a bunch of mixers because she tried to move him while he was screaming. And another was where she got mad because he wouldn't eat, and he threw a chopping board at her and broke her toe, which is really a lot. And she says that she began seeing someone named Roger, and she was feeling less lonely. She says that Roger's company moved him to London, and she decided to go with him. And she was going to say goodbye, but when she called, his dad told her to leave and never come back. And it's all really heart-wrenching, and she says she tries to write him every week, and she describes shopping trips and new jobs and dentist appointments, and Chris begins to feel really terrible and sick because he realizes his mother isn't dead and his dad lied to him. It took him this long and several letters to be sure, and he starts to lose track of time, and he vomits on the bed, which is terrible. And later, his dad comes into the room, realizes what happened, and Christopher says he's kind of having an out-of-body experience because he's having trouble. He could see what his dad is doing and hear him, but it's like it's not happening to him. His dad is thankfully not angry, but instead saying he's really sorry. He begins to cry and says it was an accident, that he just thought it would be best. He shakes Chris's shoulder to no reaction, so Chris is really out of it. He sits him up and kind of cleans him off and takes him to the bathroom. Chris then switches and says that his teacher once displayed to him how people have different minds using a Smarties case and a pencil. So she said, what do you think is in the Smarties case? And he said, Smarties. And she showed him it's a pencil. And then she closed it and she says, what do you think your mom thinks is in the Smarties case? And he says, a pencil. Because he says that he didn't understand that people's minds don't know the same information as his. And he says people's minds are like computers because there's a picture of our lives on a screen that we are watching. And sometimes people even imagine a person watching that screen, but that's just another screen. And they don't realize this because our brains turn off for fractions of a second to switch between thoughts and screens. And people think the missing bits are special. Basically, Chris is saying that everyone sees the world a different way, and the things we don't see or realize are things that intrigue us, but they don't make us any different. To put it in an even simpler way, mysteries aren't always special or good like he thought. Anyway, Christopher here is obviously having realization that the things in his life that are missing, the actual mystery of his mom, was overlooked by him, and he's having a really hard time accepting it. We learn that his dad bathes and cleans him, dresses him. He asks if he's hungry. Chris is completely non there. Like, I don't even know. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. I'm looking for a word that's eluding me. But basically, he's just non-responsive. That's the word. The entire time. And his dad leaves to wash the sheets. And Chris tells us that he's starting to double twos in his head, but he's having trouble focusing, and that's keeping him calm. And his dad comes back in and says this to him. Look, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I want you to know that you can trust me. And okay, maybe I don't tell the truth all the time. God knows I try, Christopher. God knows I do, but life is difficult, you know. It's bloody hard telling the truth all the time. Sometimes it's impossible, and I want you to know that I'm trying. I really am. And perhaps this is not a very good time to say this, and I know you're not going to like it, but you have to know that I'm going to tell you the truth from now on about everything, because if you don't tell the truth now, then later on it hurts more. So, Father rubbed his face with his hands and pulled his chin down with his fingers and stared at the wall. I could see him out of the corner of my eye. And he said, I killed Wellington, Christopher. Which got me. What? It makes so much sense why he was so mad with Christopher about this investigation, but also what the hell? His dad is way more violent than I thought he was, and Christopher in this moment actually thinks his dad is joking because he doesn't understand. And his dad explains further that he was seeing Mrs. Shears, but she wasn't interested in continuing it. And apparently that night she said some really mean things. So naturally, like a totally sane person, he killed her dog because he thought she cared more for it than for them two. And Chris realizes that it wasn't a joke, and he's starting to get really frightened. And his dad says he's sorry again and that it'll all be okay, and he leaves. And Chris thinks to himself that he has got to get out of the house because his dad is a murderer, and that he said, trust me, but he can't because his dad lied to him. And so he waits until 1:20 in the morning, grabs his pet rat Toby, a coat, a box of his own food from the kitchen, sneaks by his dad asleep on the couch, and hides between the shed and the fence for the night. He puts a coat over his rat's cage to keep him warm and stares at the stars until he falls asleep. In the morning, he hears his dad calling for him and pulls an old tarp over his head to hide. Eventually, his dad drives off in his van, probably to search for him. And he decides that his best option is to live with Mrs. Shears, so he goes to knock on her door, but she doesn't answer. He hides behind her trash cans, trying to think of what to do. He goes through all of his options, like his uncle or living with Mrs. Alexander, but she's a stranger, and realizes that going to London to live with his mom is the only chance and his safest option, which means he will have to take the train to London. And he realizes the idea of his home being in London makes him sad because of how far away it is. And he realizes that because of this, he could never be an astronaut, which again makes him really sad. He tries to have Mrs. Alexander take care of Toby, but she asks him too many questions and says, you should talk to your dad, like don't run away like a normal human. And he runs away. He goes back into their house because his dad is out, packs food for Toby and himself, takes his father's credit card, puts Toby in his pocket because the cage is heavy, and walks to his school so he can ask Sioban where the train station is. At this point, I'm worried for him because while his dad is not good, I definitely want him to talk to someone like Sioban, so I am real relieved he's going to see her. That is, until he gets to the school and sees his dad's van parked out front. When he sees it, he vomits again, and holding the Swiss Army in his hand for protection, he asks a stranger for directions to the train station. The woman is confused and says that you can see it from here and points out the building to him, and he asks how to get to it, and she says, follow that bus. And he chases that bus for 6 blocks before he loses it, which is so sad. And on the way, he gets confused, which he says is frightening because it's really unlike him, and he loses the building. So he decides that he'll move in a spiral through the streets until he finds it and draws a little diagram for the reader, which is very cute and also really sad, but also very smart. But anyway, Christopher tells us that he has trouble being in new places because he literally sees and memorizes everything he sees. So it can be really tiring and overwhelming. He says that when he stops at a field with cows, we might see, oh, there's a field and some houses and some cows. But he says, I can see the field and the field is yellow, and I see 5 brown cows with a white spot on them, and I see 6 white cows with a brown spot, and there are 10 houses and 3 with red chimneys, and he counts all these things in his head, and it's really exhausting and frightening for him if he has too much information at one time, which makes sense and is really well put because it's just one of those things where I was like, oh, like what a nice way to explain it to somebody, you know? Christopher draws a diagram of the train system in his mind, saying that he only knows about trains from a train set he had when he was younger. He says that the diagram is not very accurate because he's very scared and not thinking so well. So he stands against a wall, lowers himself into a crouch, covers his ears, and realizes that he can't leave the station because he needs to board a train, so he needs to find a spot to sit down. He walks through a little tunnel, saying in his head the exact steps he's going to take, like, I will walk down the tunnel, I will find a spot to sit down, shut my eyes and think. And he says this over and over again until he gets to the other side, goes up some stairs, and he starts to get a little bit stressed out, starts to groan until he sees some chairs and a table in a corner. And so he sits down and closes his eyes and thinks. He says that he begins to think of something called Conway's Soldiers, which is like a math equation drawing thing. It's like a puzzle to calm himself down. And eventually he realizes that there is a policeman in front of him who says that he has been sitting there for over 2 hours. And Christopher says he's nervous at first, but the policeman is pretty nice and asks him basic questions and offers to walk him to an ATM so he can get money for a train ticket. The officer seems a little confused and a teeny bit callous, but he's not terrible. And Christopher warns him not to touch him. And the officer says, why would I touch you? I promise I won't. And it's kind of cute, which is nice. Christopher is able to buy a ticket to London, and he's still asking questions that confuse people, which honestly I respect. I hate it when you're in a new place and everyone expects that everyone knows how to do stuff, like trains and subways. Like, that stuff is confusing. Why should I know if I've never done it before? But anyway, he makes his way to the platform by pretending that the people are demons blocking him from the train. Now, I only had a tiny problem with this because he just said not too long ago that imagination is an issue for him, but he's making a lot of changes, so maybe this is one of those changes. I don't know. Anyway, Chris says that he likes timetables and knowing the exact time because of the way that the universe, time, and space relate. So he has to know the time, and he likes to set schedules for himself. So he just likes the timetables of the train. On the train, once he gets there, a cop boards and says, Christopher. And Christopher is like, what? And the cop says, oh, thank goodness I found you just in time because your dad is looking for you. And Christopher says, did you arrest him? And the cop says, what? And he says, my dad killed a dog. And the cop says, we'll talk about that when I bring you back. And he tries to touch Christopher, and Christopher screams, and then the train starts to move. So the cop waits with him and radios his officer friends to tell them what's going on. And not knowing there's a bathroom, Chris pees his pants, which is kind of sad, and the officer tells him to just go to the bathroom. And Chris, once he gets there, is super grossed out because there's like some poo on the seat, and he can't even wash his hands, but he does it. And when he comes out, he's feeling so stressed that he sees this little small space behind the suitcase on like a rack, and he crawls back there to calm down and starts doing quadratic equations in his head because, you know, same about the quadratic equations. I can't do that. And honestly, at this point, I own rats, okay? And my rats would not be chill to sit in my pocket for this long, especially not if I'm laying down and there's a train. No way in hell am I keeping hold of a rat for that long. Just saying. Anyway. Because he's hiding here, the cop loses track of him and gets off at the next exit. Like, he's like, Christopher, and is obviously really irritated. And Chris is up there for a long time. He scares a lady who's like grabbing her bag. And he also discusses, he's thinking about God and how people find life to be confusing, but it's actually very logical because of the way that human beings are made and created and the way the world works, which is an interesting topic. And I'm going to get back to that. But anyway, he stays on the train for a while, imagining a map and trying to figure out how long it will be until he's in London. Different people react with surprise, disgust, or amazement at him hiding there. And eventually, after a while, he gets down, and the cop and his bag are both gone. He gets off the train, but the new room he walked into is really big, so he kneels and groans until he's able to imagine a red line from where he is to where he wants to go. And as he walks, he chants left, right, until he gets there, which is a cute trick he said that Sayoban taught him, which is nice. One person tells him that a cop is looking for him, but he just keeps walking, and he starts to describe all the signs muddling together in his brain, like all the words mixing up because there's too much information for him. And he puts his hands into like a little like pirate, telescope thing when you were a kid, you put a little hole over one eye so he can receive less information. And tries to read the signs. And poor Chris, he's trying really hard and he's doing really well, but he's having a rough time. And one man tries to help him, but Chris holds up a knife in obvious stress, and the man backs off. And he goes to information, and they tell him how to get to his mom's new address. They say you have to take the tube, quote unquote, to a certain junction. So he goes to where the tube is, and he watches how people buy tickets, and he watches how they do it so he can do it. And then he makes his way to the platform, and he's thinking that he really wants to get there soon. However, at the platform, this is his lowest moment because there's so many people and the train is so loud that he sits down on a bench and he just groans and he can't move and he's feeling sick and he's shaking and scared and he feels like he's going to die and he wants to go home, but he can't. And I just feel so bad for Chris at this moment. You're like, no, poor Chris, almost there, but so far. And then he says that he sits for a long time just listening to the train until there are less people and less sounds. And then at this point, he realizes that Toby is missing from his pocket. So Chris starts to look around the entire platform, just wandering around. He sees some mice, but they're not Toby. And eventually he sees Toby down on the rails. And so he climbs down to get him. People shout at him and tell him to get out. And he tries to pick up Toby, but Toby runs away. And he tries again to catch him. Someone tries to grab his shoulder, but he screams. He sees Toby. He hears the train incoming. He's able to pick up Toby, and Toby bites him and tries to jump out of his hands. And he starts to see the train coming, and he runs to the platform, and the man who touched his shoulder grabs him while he screams and pulls him onto the platform. And while he's screaming and standing there and sitting there, the man and the woman ask him if he's all right. The man's really annoyed because he's like, what the hell were you doing? And Chris explains that he was saving his rat, Toby. And the woman touches him again and he screams, so she leaves. And then another woman comes by and asks if she can help. And he asks her to stand further away. And so she does. And that's really, really nice. And he says that he sits there for 8 trains until he's finally able to stand up and get on the train himself. Oh my gosh. Well, that was a really dramatic moment where he's on the rail. I was like, this is not where I expected this book to go. I thought we were just going to be investigating the death of a dog. And I was like, oh my God, that was so stressful. But he's okay and the rat's okay. And that's all I care about. That's all we care about, isn't it? Anyway, at the junction, finally there, he buys a map from a stand nearby. And he has a tense and odd conversation with the man because in every situation, they don't expect him to ask questions, I guess. And so when he asks questions, they're like, what, are you stupid? And they're kind of weird with him. But eventually he just keeps asking the question until he gets an answer. And so he finally buys this map. He makes a little pathway to his parents' house, to his mom's house in his head and decides how to get there. And then he starts walking on his way. And finally, eventually, he finds the house with the matching address from the envelopes. That's how he's been doing this. And when he realizes that no one is home, he decides to hide behind the dustbins and wait until his mom comes home. It's raining and freezing and he's shivering and it's very sad. But while he's hiding, he hears the voices of a mom and a man arguing as they walk by, and he comes out and sees them. The man is Mr. Shears, by the way, the ex-husband of Mrs. Shears. That's who Roger is. And his mom is shocked. She's like, Christopher, and she tries to hug him, but he pushes her away. And she's like, I'm sorry, I forgot. And instead they do the hand thing. And Mr. Shears is mad. He's like, I guess Ed is here too, and is really super rude. And Chris explains he just came on the train by himself and it was very scary. And like we said, he's soaked and shivering, and says that his dad's still in Swindon. That's the name of the tiny town. And they let him inside because she's like, quick, come inside, you're shivering. And Chris tells her he wants to live with her because his dad killed Wellington and he's scared of him. And Shears is super rude and says like, Jesus Christ, like obviously annoyed. And his mom berates Mr. Shears and brings him inside. She runs a bath for him, and he tells her about how his dad said she was dead and hid her letters, and she cries and apologizes, and she's like, I'm so sorry, and asks to hold his hand, but Chris is like, I don't like anyone touching me, and she's like, okay, that's fine. And a policeman visits the house, and he's like, do you want to be here? And Chris is like, yeah, and he's like, your dad's looking for you, and he's like, yeah, and he asks his mom, he's like, can he stay here? And his mom's like, obviously, and the dad's like, well, just let us know if he comes by and need help, well, whatever, so bye. And he leaves. At 2:30 in the morning, Chris wakes up, and he can hear his father shouting because I guess he came to town once he learned where he was. And he's arguing with his mom, who is livid about all the lies. And his father is mad because she left with only him to care for Chris. And I know that the dynamics of a household, well, I don't know, but I'm assuming that the dynamics of a household for a child with special needs is probably super confusing and stressful. But I don't know. It seems really odd to tell your son that his mom's dead when she's not. I don't know, at dad, but whatever. And his dad comes upstairs and goes into Chris's room, and Chris is really scared and has his like little Swiss Army knife out. But his mom comes in and says, it's okay, Christopher, I'm here. And his dad says he's so sorry for everything that happened. And he holds up his hand for the little hand touchy thing, but Chris doesn't touch his hand or say anything because he's still scared. And his dad starts to cry. And honestly, I feel a teeny bit bad for him, but not that bad, okay? Because this dude literally killed a dog, lied to his son for 2 years, and hid all the letters from his mom. Like, I don't have too much sympathy for you because you're a liar. And also you hit him recently. Like, what is he doing? And anyway, his mom says, why don't you go, please? And a policeman comes and gets the dad and like makes sure he's calm and stuff. And Christopher says that he has one of his favorite dreams where, this is funny, where everyone is dead because of some sort of virus. And the only people left are people just like him. And he can go into people's houses and play detective and go to the beach. And his father's house is his house and he's happy. And that's kind of sad because he just wants such like a simple life. He just doesn't want to be bothered. And it just keeps not happening for poor Christopher. And in the morning, he has breakfast, and Shears is like, okay, he can stay a couple days. And his mom's like, he can stay as long as he needs. And obviously, they're having issues. And this is another one of those moments where, since he's an unreliable narrator, we have to read between the lines. It's just the fact that they're arguing a lot that really clues us into the fact that that relationship is probably not great. That day, she takes the day off work and goes to the store for clothes for Christopher. And when she gets back, Christopher tells her that she needs to take him to Swindon so he can take his A-levels math test. And she's like, I can't take you to that. I have a job. And he's like, but you have to. And she's like, we're going to talk about it later. And that night he goes outside, but he can't see the stars because of light pollution. And he can't sleep, so he crouches between some cars because it's like a small space. And his mom freaks out because she can't find him. And eventually she's like, she finds him, he finds her. She's like, don't do that again because London's dangerous. And he's like, okay. His mom ends up losing her job because she's missed so many days and she was just a temp. So she still says though that she can't take him to the exam and they're going to have to get it postponed. So she calls the principal and postpones it for next year, and he's super upset and sad. And the next day, there are too many yellow and red cars for his system to work for good days and bad days. And she takes him for ice cream and tells him that his test was officially postponed, and he screams at the ice cream shop. And Mr. Shears and his mom argue, and he comes in to say some mean things to Chris. Mr. Shears that night comes in and wakes up Chris in his bed and is like, you think you're so clever, aren't you? And she comes in like, I'm so sorry, Christopher, and makes him leave. And it's so like uncomfortable how many grown men are just screaming at this teenager for no reason. Like, come on. What the heck? It doesn't make any sense to me, but I don't know. Anyway, she tells Chris that they are moving back to Swindon. And while Chris is scared, he moves with her back to his old house, and his father gets home and he's like, how'd you even get in here? And she's like, it's my house too, remember? And he's like, did you bring your fancy man? And she's like, no. And despite the fact that they're back in Swindon, she still tells Christopher that he can't take his A-levels math test. And he's still really upset because he's like, but we're back now. And she's like, yeah, but we already postponed it. And so the next day, she wakes up and, oh, I skipped a spot. He doesn't sleep that night. Just a little warning. He doesn't sleep that night. And the next day, he and his mom go to see Siobhan. And Mrs. Shears is super rude to her outside. She's like, oh, did he leave you finally? And she's like, shut up, Mrs. Shears. And they drive to the school and she talks to Siobhan, and Siobhan is able to work it so that he can take the test if he wants, but it will have to be like, I think in the next couple days. And despite the fact that he hasn't slept at all, he decides he wants to take the test. And so he takes the test, and at first he feels like he can't breathe, so he counts to 50 in his head. And then he works through all the questions, and he's not sure if he got them all, and he's really nervous about it, but he finally took the test. That night, his father comes back to the house. I guess he hasn't been staying at the house while they're there. I don't know. And Christopher screams. And his mom said that she won't let anything bad happen to him. So he goes into the garden and he's staring up at the stars. And his dad comes outside and just looks at him for a while. And then he punches a hole in the fence and leaves. Yeah, that's not convincing me, sir, that you are any less of like an issue or have any less of an anger issue. Like, what are you doing? But anyway, goodness. I understand being frustrated. Stop hitting and punching and killing things. I swear to goodness gracious. Anyway, Mr. Shears comes out of a taxi one day and throws a box of his mom's stuff outside for her. On another day, his father comes into the house and asks Chris how he did on his test. And at first, Chris doesn't answer, but his mom asks him to. And he says he thinks he did well, but he didn't know if he got all the questions right because he didn't eat and he didn't sleep. And his father thanks him, and Chris says, what for? And he says, just thank you. And his mom gets a job, and so they move to a new apartment, and she also goes to the doctor and gets some pills to stop her being sad, except they make her faint sometimes, which doesn't really sound like a solution, but I don't know. I guess it's better. So they move to a small apartment, and they have to share a bathroom with the hallway, but Chris is okay with using it for the moment. And he tries to focus on good things like his mom says. He says that she gave him a puzzle, which he really liked, and that he helped his mom paint her room. But he also says there are more bad things than good things. Like he has to stay with his dad after school because his mom works till 5:30. And he says that every day he pushes his bed against the door to keep him out, and that his dad will talk outside the door and sit there for a long time, but Chris won't answer. Okay, so it's clear to me that his dad obviously loves him and like feels like he messed up, and the effort to reconnect with him is sincere, which I appreciate, but that was a huge mess up. So I totally understand where Chris is coming from. And like, I feel bad for the dad because it's like, oh, like obviously he feels bad about that thing, but like also I haven't seen any major changes in his behavior other than his feeling bad. So I don't know. Hopefully it's on the up and up, but what can you do? Anyway. Another bad thing, he says, Toby died because he was old, and so they bury him in a little pot, and his dad asks one day to talk to him just for 5 minutes, and he uses a timer, and Chris says, okay, because his mom is there, and his dad tells him, Chris, I really want you to trust me. We're going to have to work on it together like a project. I'm really, really sorry, but hopefully this will help and show you that I want to do better and that I am sorry. And he brings out a puppy. It's a little 2-month-old golden retriever, and he says it will stay with him and that he can visit it anytime. And then he finds out that he got an A on his maths test, which is awesome. And he names the dog Sandy. And he says one time his mom got the flu, so he stayed at his dad's for 3 weeks, but Sandy would bark if anyone came into his room, so he felt okay. He says that he and dad planted a vegetable patch and that he's going to take the next test, like higher up one, like the further math. And then he's going to go to university, but it doesn't have to be in London because he doesn't like London now. And then the very last bit of the book is, and then I will get a first-class honors degree, and I will become a scientist. And I know I can do this because I went to London on my own, and because I solved the mystery of who killed Wellington. And I found my mother, and I was brave, and I wrote a book, and that means I can do anything. And that's the end of this book. That's the book, you guys. What did you think? Did you like it? I really, really liked this book. It was a really nice read. For some reason, I don't know if it ranks on my favorite reads ever, and I honestly can't pinpoint for you why. There's nothing I disliked about it. I think it just wasn't like mind-shatteringly awesome. I guess I just have a high standard for a book to make one of my favorites lists. But this book was so enjoyable. It's one of those books that, no, it's not my favorite, but I would definitely reread it. it, and I would definitely recommend it to people because it was so fun to read. And I think it was just an interesting book. And there were a lot of things I liked about it. So why don't we jump into discussion and I can tell you what I liked about it. The very first thing that occurs to me that I liked the most about this book is the voice. So when I say voice, I mean the style and the way I can hear him in my head. So it really feels like Christopher is talking to me, and I really feel like I get a lot of his character, and I like the way he does it. So I don't know if you've noticed, but it's written from Christopher pretending to write. It's like, oh, this is my journal that I wrote and this is the book, right? And it feels that way and it feels accurate. We talked before about how he mentions characters but doesn't explain them. He never fully mentioned what Sayoban is. I'm assuming she's a teacher, but we have to assume those things because he doesn't actually tell us. The other thing about his voice that I think works really well is that he doesn't use contractions. And by not using contractions, it makes him sound really formal. And I think that works very well for Christopher. In the parts that I've spoken to you out loud, you may have heard that he's like, well, this is called a rhetorical question. It is a question with a question mark at the end. But Sayoban says that you're not supposed to answer it because people already know the answer. And that working through of a process and defining things for the reader while still not using contractions is present throughout the whole book. And it really makes him have a strong voice because I don't read books that are written like that usually because it's the way he thinks. So I just think voice was really well done. I also really like the way that the chapters are so short. And I also really like the way they jump around. I think that it might feel random to someone who's reading it, but I don't think it is. So, for example, we have that scene where his dad and him have a fight. And then immediately after that, he talks about why he doesn't like the colors yellow and brown. And I think that might seem like a really odd jump, but it's the only time, those are the only things that he really hates other than being touched, right? So it's interesting that after a fight, he would be ruminating on things he doesn't like. So after a fight with his dad, he's thinking about why he doesn't like yellow and brown. It's one of those things where I think Sayoban even asks him after he goes to school the next day, she's like, are you sad about that? And he's like, no, I'm not sad. And she's like, well, sometimes we don't realize that we're sad. And I feel like with Christopher, I don't think he realizes he feels a certain way. It just comes up in the order he chooses to talk about things. So at the very beginning, when Wellington is dead, and whenever he's kind of in a weird state, he's also thinking about his mom. And when he's thinking about his memory, he's thinking of his mom. And we learn the story through what comes up for him. And so if you look closely at what order he does things, it all makes sense. That's all I'm trying to say. When you look at the order, you can see oh, he had this altercation with his dad, and now he's talking about how much he hates yellow and brown. Oh, we learned that he's talking about God and death, and his mom died. So it's all related in his brain. He chooses these topics because they are related in a personal way to his life. And so he thinks about them. He thinks about the stars really often because he goes outside to stargaze. And that's probably what prompted him to do research and think about the stars in his life. So it's just one of those things where, remember how I said that this is unreliable narrator, we have to read between the lines. Not only do we have to read between the lines of what Christopher is seeing, we have to read between the lines of what Christopher is writing down and the order he's doing things and the way he explains certain things. So I think that that's really well done because it's really subtle and it's really interesting and it keeps the reader going. And I don't know, I thought it was really well done. I think that small stuff like that in books is not always required, but when it is done and it's done well, it adds a lot because as a reader, I don't even think you would notice that that's happening, but there's a flow to it that's almost unconscious, that it doesn't feel weird when he jumps from certain chapters to certain chapters because you feel that flow is there because without realizing it, you're still talking about the same thing. So when he is sitting and hiding on the rack in the subway and he's thinking about how simple and logical it is, and why people believe in God, it doesn't feel like it's related, but it is because he's thinking about it while he's stuck in a tiny subway and he's thinking about how people think of God whenever they get scared or they don't understand the world. And he doesn't understand the world, but he's trying to make sense of it. And he says it's logical and it's really easy to think of it in certain ways. So everything tracks and makes sense. And I think it's really well done because for a short book like this, I find I don't know. Sometimes I just don't have very high expectations. I just think it'll be a fun read. So to find some sort of like detailing like that, I was like, oh, nice. This is actually like really, really well done and well crafted in terms of writing. So I really appreciated it. I think that the beginning is also really well done. So when it comes to a book like this, I feel like I'm jumping around a lot. But when it comes to a book like this, I have a critique. I have like categories that I think of about what's done well. And I think what's done well is the beginning, because he starts off with Wellington being dead. And the first half of the book and second half of the book are like almost unrelated, but they definitely aren't. So I really like that whole theme and whole undercurrent of things being unrelated seemingly, but then being very related at its core is like a really nice message. And I also just like that it throws you into it and you like are wondering why there's a dead dog. And I was like, what? Like, who killed a dog? And I was really mad about it. And then I think the ending is also done well. I think it's a little slow because I think at the very end, I personally was reading like, what now type of thing. But it's also done well in the fact that there's lots of highs and lows, but for the most part, he's in a stable position again. And in general, his life is probably better than it was because his mom is in it now and he's not being lied to. So while he had a bunch of disruption in his life and there was a lot of bad moments, I think it's one of those things where you like get a massage and it hurts, but later you feel better. So like we had to watch that little ending where things slowly got better with the dog and planting a vegetable patch and like the good things that started to stack more than the bad things like Toby passing away and stuff like that. So I think the beginning and the ending was well done. The structure is well done. The voice is well done. I don't know if anything is really poorly done in this. I think that there are a couple like instances of what's it called when like it's not correct, but like small instances of it. The number of times I forget a word when I'm recording this is so frustrating. But anyway, there's like inconsistencies. There's small inconsistencies sometimes in what Chris says to us versus what he does. So like there's small stuff like I'm not very good at imagining things, but then he's like, I'm imagining a red line. And that's slightly different than him saying I'm not good at imagining like a happy place, but like also he talks about his dreams. So it's just one of those things. But I'm willing to give that the benefit of the doubt because he's a person, he's not like a robot, and he's writing from his point of view. So he might do things without realizing he's able to do things because that's human nature. So I'm perfectly fine with that. It's just one of those things where when you set it in boundaries and you say, I can't imagine anything, and then he imagines something, you go, oh, well, he just imagined something. But the problem is that what he's saying is, I can imagine a line on the ground. I cannot imagine, like a happy place or pretending that I'm in a spaceship or whatever. So it's stuff like that. Like I understand what he's going for. So it's okay. And I'll forgive small inconsistencies because in general, the book was really enjoyable. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was probably the theme of the mystery and the title. So The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. I love that title, first of all, because it's really fun to say and it's really, really just interesting and it's very British. But I really like the title because he calls it in the book, The Murder, Who Killed Wellington, ? That's what he calls it himself. But the title of the book is not Who Killed Wellington. It's The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. Because if you're an English major, you might remember, or just in general took an English class, you might remember that all books start with an inciting incident. So I like the use of the word incident because the dog is an incident. It is not the mystery. It's part of the mystery, but it is not the whole of the book. So I like that it's called The Curious Incident because it implies to me that it's just an instance in this book and it's not what it's about. And then on top of that, it shows me that wow, it might seem like that. Like those words are one of those words that it can totally mean that that's what the book is about, but it also might not mean that. So I like that it's ambiguous and I like that it asks questions and I like that it might lead us to different places. So I really like the title. I think it was a great choice despite the fact that he himself, Christopher, thinks of it in a different way, what his book is called. And I think that that's perfect because we now know that Christopher doesn't see everything inside himself even. So he calls it Who Killed Wellington, but the author realizes it should be called The Curious Incident of the Dog of the Nighttime because that the book is not about who killed Wellington. It's about an incident and all of the events that followed it. And also, it's about mysteries. So in general, we have two mysteries going on that end up being the same thing. We have the mystery of who killed Wellington, and we have the mystery of what happened to his mom. And we start with Wellington, and it's the obvious one. But even as you're reading, as a reader, you wonder, what happened to his mom? And he says his mom died. And then he says he's not able to make it to the funeral. And he says that she's in the hospital, but he can't visit her and stuff like that. It makes you wonder, as a reader, what the hell is going on? And so the mysteries end up being intertwined. And Christopher realizes that the mystery of Wellington is actually part of a bigger mystery in his life that he didn't even notice. And this mystery and him solving it of what has been missing from his life and what's been being kept from him is part of the larger story of his coming of age. So as we talked about before, loss of innocence and coming of age stories are usually about an event that reminds you that you're not a child anymore and kind of rips away your point of view and forces you into adulthood. So Life of Pi is that way. Catcher in the Rye is that way. Secret Garden is not really that way because it's like a nice version. But the loss of innocence stories are like that. And I'd say that it definitely happens here, where his world that he has built for himself and finds himself very stable in is a facade and it's not real. And obviously, knowing where he is in space and time and knowing that he is real is important to Christopher, as we've seen throughout the book in his emphasis on what time it is, where he is, and knowing all this information. Knowing that he is real and where he is in his life is obviously so important to him that is such a crumbling effect that his whole life is just a lie to him now. So while I was reading, I feel bad for his dad. I understand why Christopher's so upset, because obviously maybe some of us might forgive his dad sooner, but for Christopher, his whole life was a lie. And that is not just a problem in the terms that it hurts his feelings or that he feels tricked. It's a problem in that he doubted his like position in space and time and the universe and who he can trust, and what he thought was real is not. And that just rips away his point of view, and it affects him in a way where he does an adventure that he might not have thought himself capable of. And he goes through all these scary events, and he realizes that mysteries are not as fun or special as they seem. And he realizes that, people cling to things because they're scared and confused, like he feels now. And he starts to understand certain things about life and certain things about quote unquote normal people that maybe he didn't realize before, because he's having to experience a somewhat traumatic event for him. And he's able to do this adventure because he's forced to. And at the end, he comes out, I won't say a better person, but a different person, because he's had to redefine the world in terms of himself, and he's come to understand certain things. So I don't know. I just think it's really well done. It's a loss of innocence story. It's a murder mystery. It's a family relationship story. It is really well written. It's a fast read. It's very cute. The voice of Christopher is strong, and I feel like I know him and we're friends. And I feel like I even like his dad, even though I hate him. The ability to make me empathize with a character and understand their story is really well done. I don't know. I think this book is definitely just such a good read. And I think it was such a fun way to start our spooky reads, because it's really kind of suspenseful, because you're really scared for Christopher while you read it. You really are. I was like, oh my God, he's going to die on the rails in the subway. It's not a paranormal story. It's not Paranormal Activity, but it is a suspenseful story, and it's about a murder mystery, and it's about dogs, and there are rats, and there are family lies and betrayal. And I thought it was great for our spooky adventure and to start off our spooky month of reading. But anyway, I am so happy that you guys came and listened to me today. Thank you so much. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and definitely review. It helps me so much if you review the podcast, and I would super appreciate it. If you want more Bad Book Club, you can follow us on all of our social media at Bad Book Club Pod, just on everything. Also, if you want to support the podcast, you can buy merchandise from our website, or you can buy one of the books that I talk about through my affiliate link below. And you can also support a local bookstore while you do that, so that's pretty cool beans. I also have an announcement I wanted to announce to some people before you go. Don't leave yet. that I think I will be moving the podcast to Wednesday mornings instead of Tuesday evenings. I have been publishing these at Tuesday evenings, but I think Wednesday mornings would just work better because I can announce it more and I can publish it to be at an exact time. And I just think it would work better for my schedule. And I think I would reach more people if I released in the morning rather than the evening. So I'm just going to start next week releasing Wednesday morning. I'm going to schedule it really early. So if you listen to this really early, hopefully it won't affect you too much. And thank you so much for sticking with me and for listening and for just in general being amazing. I hope your Halloween month is going well. And I'll see you next time for a book that I'm very excited to talk about because it's Twilight. I read it. I read Twilight for you guys. Are you happy? Are you excited? I have some thoughts on it, okay? I'm not going to spoil it, but I have some thoughts. So thank you so much. Stay amazing, and I will see you next time on Wednesday, remember. So bye, lovelies. Bye.